Got it.
There it goes.
There we
It's
go.
on.
There it is.
All right, so the first thing I'll share is this is a homeschool tracker. And it just basically is tracking the people who have homeschool petitions. So as you might recall, we've already approved one this year, and that would be the Blanco family down at the bottom here. That was approved at the October 1st school committee meeting. We have 4 families, the Augsburgs, the Monis, the Gaspers, and the Hassans, that all submitted petitions in the last week and a half. And altogether, we have 9 students, so 2 for Augsburgs, 1 for Moni, 2 for Gaspers, and 4 for the Hassan family. So I did send them in advance. I'm not sure if you want me to go through all 9, or if you
Yeah.
guys had an opportunity to review them, and if you wanted to just jump to questions.
The Hassan family does this every year.
As the
They're-
Gasper
As
family.
the Gaspers, they're regulars, and we were actually waiting for those ones.
Yep. So that is 6 of them right there, the Hassans and the Gaspers. That's
Wow.
6 of them that have been doing it for years. The Augsburgs, it's a 1-year thing. Their mom is actually a teacher at the high school, and they're just, the screen time is a big concern with them. So they want to do a 1-year homeschool and then come back to the school the following year. And the Moni, this is a 1st grader that is new. And there's a lot of like religious implications for this one. So I'm happy to sort of run through them, but there's a lot of pages here. So I don't know if if you had an opportunity to go through them and you wanted to have questions, that would be fine. I will tell you that all four families' petitions, I feel, meet the requirements according to the policy. For the most part, I don't think any of them are perfect. I think I was spoiled with the Wong families last year because they had a real exemplar. These 4 are okay. I think they're good enough to pass, but I'm not in love with them.
Thank you for sharing, Adam. I just have 2 quick questions. One, do you envision, at this time last year, did we have this amount of petitions?
So last year we had the Hassans and the Gaspers. So that is 6 right there. Well, actually, it's technically one of the Hassans is Hafsa, who is a kindergartner. Kindergartners don't have to go through this process, but we might as well get them in the habit because I assume she'll be coming back next year as a 1st grader. So we had those 3 plus the 2 Gaspers, which was 5, and then we had the 2 Wongs, which is 7.
We had one more too. One other child.
We did?
Mhm.
Okay.
So there was one other family.
So Sarah was taking care of that prior to me getting hired. So the only one that I dealt with was the Wongs last year, and they have not submitted yet, but they're working on it. The dad had told me. So the Wongs were there last year. So really the Monis and the Augsburgs and the Blanco are the new ones. And the Augsburgs are like a 1-year only homeschool.
Okay. And so with that, I wonder, giving, our online virtual learning right now, I wonder if in the coming years we will see an increase in homeschooling petitions and the effects that would have on our budget. Have you had any thoughts on that, or do you envision that do you hypothesize that happening?
Well, what I can say is that the ones that you're looking at, I have had a number of other sort of outreach and questions, and I know, Kelly, you've seen a few of them. So a lot of times what was happening is there was some confusion with families around the difference between homeschooling and remote learning. So I would say between 6 and 8 families have called to inquire because they didn't feel safe bringing their kids into the school and they thought they had to homeschool. So, in talking with those families, I explained to them the process that we would have an online learning academy or OLA, which the school would be required to educate the child, but the child would be learning from home, and that is actually what they were looking for. So to answer your question, I don't think it's significantly more than any other years. We have had significant more inquiries around it, but not significantly more petitions.
So
Got it. Okay,
statewide,
thank you.
yeah, Kelly, statewide, superintendents have noticed an increase in homeschool requests statewide. And then I can tell you in Somerville, every year, the average number is about 50 homeschool requests.
Just a quick
Okay,
follow-up.
thank you, Ami.
Yeah, I was just coming out of a meeting where I heard information that by December we'll get some numbers statewide that paint a more accurate picture.
Mhm.
And there has been some small drop off. Who's to say if it's because of COVID or whatnot? But I wanted to ask Adam, since you did send these ahead of time, and I do recall as being part of the subcommittee last year, I do recall some of the families, as you pointed out. I was curious if you wanted to talk a little bit about, I think it was the Moni family, or is it the Blanco family, which you said you weren't, that was the only particular package, I guess, that you looked at that sort of, you know, I want to get to a point where you feel comfortable with what they're presenting. You said you weren't in love with them. So I'm just curious if you had any observations or anything that you think is worth discussing together as a group about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the Wong family that was from last year, and I mean, he had like a 16-page petition, which was very, very detailed, spelling out what would be taught each week all the way through. So like, I'll give you an example. If I pull up the Gasper petition, can you all see that? I just switched.
Yep.
Okay. So it's really, this is the educational plan for Catherine, who's a 10th grader. They do have, some description about what they're going to focus on. There's a daily schedule. We'll follow an established routine dependent on coordinated activities. But there's no like from 8 to 9, we're going to be learning math. And from 9 to 10, we're going to be learning English. But the focus areas are here. But there is no schedule. The components of the policy exist. You're supposed to communicate the qualifications of the parent as an educator. So it says, my husband worked as an elementary art teacher in the public school system for 9 years. Prior to the birth of our son, he taught reading. So to me, that checks off that box, right? I mean, there is no detailed rubric around whether or not we approve someone's qualifications as an educator, but I'm typically looking for some college education, but that doesn't necessarily mean there has to be college education. But that's one thing I'm looking for. So when I see someone who has experience as a teacher, there's really no way to follow up on that, but that to me shows me something. This one, this request is answered in page 1, the textbooks, workbooks, and other instructional aids. They're talking about Khan Academy, they're talking about the mass curriculum frameworks, but they're not talking about specific textbooks. Like, what textbook are you going to be using? As a former math teacher, I always held strong that I preferred not to follow a textbook and teach directly from the mass curriculum framework. So if this is a skilled math teacher, then I would be okay with that. If it's not, it's really hard to know what the math frameworks mean unless you have a real math background. And this is a 10th grader, so this isn't exactly easy math. So that's what I mean by I'm not in love with it. Like, this to me doesn't prove to me that the child's going to get the education that is equal to the quality that they would have at the high school, for example. But it does check off the boxes in the policy. Does that answer your question, Marisol?
Yeah, I mean, I remember this. And I wanted to say, I felt like I remembered the Hassan family. I don't know. But so looking at grade 1, which I hear you saying that's new. I was just wondering, like, if you reviewed them and you feel confident and there's some opportunities. I know that you discussed with us before, or rather Sarah discussed with us before, that we don't really have much, like you said, ways to sort of say that well, we can approve this or can't approve it. But my question would be, are there any supports that we could offer to the families? You know, like, okay, you're choosing to homeschool, you know, just offer them like resources, whether it's through the state or the Department of Education. Like, is that sort of like the conversations we have with families when they choose to homeschool?
Yeah, so I mean, typically, we just happened to get all 9 of these in a span of 5 days while I'm also, you know, we're also dealing with COVID. So as I was getting them at a normal pace, I was working with individual families, putting in a couple of hours of back and forth with phone calls, but I got all of these all in a couple of days, and I didn't have the capacity to kind of talk them through all of, I'm normally giving feedback on the petitions and telling them the components. As far as supporting them, part of the homeschooling is that the parent is saying that they want the responsibility of educating the child, which it's hard to support if they're putting together their own plan. I mean, I'm totally open to providing some guidance, but in terms of, I can point them in the right direction, but like, we can't supply the resources.
Yeah, for sure.
The only other, the only caveat to that is if one of these children is a special education student, and we're in the process of researching how we, because I'm looking at it as, I mean, we have lawyers looking into it to make sure that we are following the rules around what we do. We obviously can't discriminate. So if a family with a special education child wants to homeschool, we can't discriminate, but we do want to make sure that we're providing the support. So I know, like, if, for example, if you have when we had St. Rose, if you have a special education student at St. Rose, they are entitled to special education services from our district. So I'm guessing it's similar to that, but we're going to figure that out. We have a meeting set up with one of the special education attorneys next week to figure out that.
Thank you, Adam.
All right. Are there any other questions?
I actually just had a quick follow-up to Kelly's earlier question. So the deadline for our enrollment for next year's Chapter 70 already passed. So would these students, because they're still in the district, count towards that number or not?
So the Hassans are not in our enrollment, and the Gaspers and the Blanco is not in our enrollment at this point. The Wongs, neither are the Wongs, even though they don't have a petition in for tonight. The only ones that are the Augsburgs, and I do believe that they would count because it's, the last I heard, unless they change it, and Ami, I'm not sure if they have, but it's still the October 1st Sims collection.
Yeah, there was no extensions.
There's no extension. So the Augsburgs were in our rolls on October 1st, so they would count. You're really talking about 2 kids with the amount of transiency in our district. As you see Sarah's reports each month, like, I think those 2 are a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, just kind of curious about the detail there. Thank you.
Okay, team, are there any other questions?
Rosemary.
Rosemary?
Can you hear me? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Adam, how do we know these kids are getting the right education? Is there any way of us checking that, or it's up to the parents, or at the end of the year? What do we see?
They are supposed to submit a report at the end of the year. I have a follow-up with the Hassans and the Gaspers because they have not sent in those reports. And part of the reason why the Wongs haven't submitted yet is because I've already been in contact with them as well, saying you need to send in your reports before I can look at your petition. So I'm in contact with them, and they are going to need to send it in. But the truth of the matter is there really is no way to verify the quality. And unfortunately, that's just the law of homeschooling. Like, there is no real way to verify it.
Yeah, see, I'm definitely against homeschooling. I mean, there are some reasons that they have to homeschool, but for me, to not just see a grade or pass them on to the next year, I just don't understand how we can do this to these students. Are they going to be ready for the next class? Are they passing in their subjects? We don't see anything. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not happy.
Yeah, I mean, as a public school educator, and at the risk of being political, I would say that I believe strongly in our public school education system, and I believe that is, I mean, my two children are in public schools, and I feel like that is the best route. But that said, I can tell you, we, as the principal of the Berkowitz, we had a phenomenal third grade teacher who was homeschooled all the way through high school, and she was absolutely brilliant and was a phenomenal educator. So, I mean, there are success stories here, and it's really difficult to assess, and we don't have a lot of wiggle room to deny. As long as they're checking off the boxes and following the policy, we really don't have the authority to deny.
I know. And how do we know with a 12th grader? I see we have a 12th grader there, not mentioning names. How do we know that that student's going to be ready to go on to college?
Yeah,
And how
we
do we
don't.
get grades? Yeah.
Yeah. We really don't. We really don't. But we're sort of stuck with that.
I know that. I know how this works. I go along with the homeschooling because that's what the parents want, and they feel they know their children, but I just don't feel they're getting the proper education being homeschooled. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
I do want to add here that Massachusetts does a bit of a better job than other states. Sarah my wife was actually homeschooled through high school, and I hear from her that there was very little oversight up in New Hampshire. So we do have a little more oversight, even though I do wish that there could be stronger safeguards there. Yeah, and we are definitely planning on sending our child to public school, but I hear you.
Yeah, and I just want to add too that I think every family is unique, and I think that for our experience, we all come from a different lived experience and preferences, and each student is unique in their learning. We see families make decisions that we scratch our heads about all the time. There's a lot of conversations about public schools, charter schools, private schools, and as we just heard, there's excellent success stories. So I'm actually like, hey, this is a year where we're doing virtual learning, talk about innovative and new. So, I think we need to just be open and, grateful, Adam, that you're there for these families to help them, meet what's being requested, and that this is something that they're, doing. If they choose to come back to the schools, hopefully, then we're here, right? So we've done our part. Is in the last follow-up, that was an excellent question on Rosemary's part, about, or Adam, when you referred to submitting a report, is that like something that's a requirement that they need to submit these reports from? Is that sorry, to make sure I understood, from last year? To basically say, like, this is where we left off, and before they submit the petition, is that something you can actually hold them to?
Yeah, there is language in the policy that says that they need to submit the report, or that could be taken into account for the approval for the following year. So I fully intend to hold those families to that. The problem is one of the families only communicates through snail mail. So there's a letter out to request that information, and the problem is, like, ultimately the way I look at this, I know they're going to go back and forth and eventually meet the requirements. So I don't want to hold up the process and meanwhile have the kids not on an approved plan. So I would like to get them educated as soon as possible so that we can get going on that. But it will be, yeah, they'll have the reports in. And to clarify one other thing, when I say we really have no way of knowing about the quality of the education, that I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstood. That doesn't mean that we don't think it is quality. There's just no way of knowing. So I know I have met the dad in the Wong family, and like my gut tells me that he's probably doing a very good job with those two children, but I'm not there, so I don't know. There's no way to actually know for sure.
In order to move forward with these proposed homeschool petitions, would you need a motion from one of the members to accept?
Yeah, so Kelly, do we need individual motions for all 4 families, or do we do it all in one blanket?
I'm happy to do them all in one blanket if the members of this committee are in agreement with that.
Yes.
All members say aye, or those who agree say aye.
Aye, aye.
Aye.
Awesome. All right, do I have a motion to accept these petitions and move them on to the school committee at large meeting?
Motion
I
to
think that's how it
accept,
goes.
motion to accept homeschool petitions, move forward to the school committee.
Do I have a second? Is there a second for this motion?
I'll second it.
Great. All right, with 5 minutes to spare, are there any lingering questions or comments before we adjourn this subcommittee?
I'll just say that to keep you guys in the loop, the process now is tomorrow I will let those families know where they are in the process, and I'll also let them know that the vote will happen on November 12th. What I also tell the families in between the subcommittee meeting and the full committee meeting is I would encourage you to start the process. Technically, the policy says that they can't start the process until it's fully approved, but in the cases of the Gaspers, the Hassans, and the Blancos, those kids are not in school right now, so I would prefer that they start educating their kids. So I'll tell them to start their plan tomorrow so that they can start their education for the year.
Thank you, Adam. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I just wanted to bring forward very quickly, Adam, that we have, and thank you, Kelly, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. That, is it possible for us to get confirmation about you having received the reports prior to our school committee meeting?
Yeah, because I'll have it on this tracker.
Is that feasible though? Like, is that reasonable? I don't know what those reports entail and how they happen.
Maybe. The problem is with the one family with the snail mail. So if they don't use email and they don't have a phone, so it's a matter of getting the snail mail back and forth. But this tracker does, see this column here, EOY, that's your end of year report submitted. So that's how I'll track it on this document.
Cool. Thank you, Adam.
But I can, what I can do is communicate that if you don't have the reports in prior to November 12th, the school committee may not approve it. So yeah, we can let you guys know that.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam, for that update. Alrighty, team, do I have a motion to adjourn this subcommittee meeting?
Motion to adjourn?
Do I have a second?
Second. I will second it.
Awesome. Meeting adjourned at 5:58, and Jeanette will also be submitting notes to Mariana. Thanks, team.
I'm
Yeah.
recording. Okay,
Oh, sorry.
we're good.
Thank you, Ami. And can someone help me out here? We usually we write down who's in attendance. The members of this committee of policy, I know, I think it's all of us know, Jeannie, Henry, myself, and Rosemary.
No, it's Jasenia. It's Jasenia, myself, you, and Rosemary, and then Kelly's the aficionado.
Yeah, and Henry's coming to participate. Got it.
Yeah.
I know Jasenia had a death in her family, so that's probably why she's not here.
Sorry to hear that. We should probably talk about sending her a card, Kelly, or something. Please let us know.
That's a good idea. I'll write that down. I'll send you all an email. Thank you, Marisol, for the idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, send our love to Jesse. So the first item on the agenda is to review the policy for naming school facilities, and Almi, you just pointed to that. So you want to take over from here?
I'm gonna have Adam actually oversees the policy committee, so Adam's gonna walk through the policy that we had created.
All right, so I'm sharing my screen. Can you all see that? So we, this policy is new from last year, and it went through school committee. So just to refresh our memories, the purpose of the policy is to ensure that Chelsea Public Schools own schools and some facilities shall be identified by names that represent a distinguished person, entity, or widely known and recognized location. So we have some guidelines. I'm not going to go through the whole policy, but just point out some things. Really, what's informing this policy is what we value. It's preferred that school facilities or portions of school facilities be named for deceased distinguished persons. So often people name facilities after someone else, and then they tend to do something unsavory after the fact. If they're deceased, they can't do that. They want strong consideration to be given to names of women and minorities. I know in our district, the majority of our schools, I think all of them, are named after white males. So they want equitable representation. They also want some time after. So if it was somebody who was working within Chelsea Public Schools or holding public office, the 10 years need to pass. I guess it would be awkward to, come back and work in a school that was named after you. The character of the individual must be considered. And then this one, so understanding that ethnic and cultural composition of a local community does change, and that school and facility names are permanent, we want to be careful that the name selected has a broad acceptance in a multicultural society and a unique association with that school community. There's a section on geographic names, like you can name it after, like it could be the Mill Hill School. So now the tricky part is, as I'm looking at this, there is a section for new or reopened schools, right? So, which we're not opening any schools now, so they're current schools. And then there's a section for portions of school facilities, but there isn't a section for renaming schools. And the only thing I can come to is in this language under E up here on page 1, where it says that to be really careful about who you name, because the facility names are permanent. So I think that would be why there's no section for renaming a school. But if we were looking at, because if we were looking at a newly reopened school, which doesn't really apply to any of our buildings, the process would be that you have to appoint a principal to run that school. That principal has to form a school naming committee, and then the school committee would then come up with 3 names for recommendation to that committee, and then the committee has to be comprised of a parent. They would solicit input from community, from various entities, neighborhood associations, parent organizations. They would deliberate and recommend in a priority order, and then basically share with the superintendent of schools, who would then bring it to school committee. The school committee would make the final decision, and that would be in the opening of a new school. The portion for renaming, for naming a portion of a school facility, like if it was a gymnasium or a library, there's a different process. So that there has to be a petition that has to be given to the school principal. And then there's some breakdown of what that petition would look like. They would have to forward a copy to the superintendent, and the petition would have to include the name or facility the place or facility to be named, the name that they're proposing, the background data or rationale, the total number of faculty, staff at the school, and then they need signatures of 60% of the faculty. And then from there, the date of authorization, and then there's an expiration date, which would be 90 days past that. So they only have 90 days to get those signatures. And then that single petition would be circulated for a period not to exceed that 90 days, signed by any faculty or staff member, and so on and so forth. From there, the principal convenes that selection committee, if appropriate, 2 students, 2 teachers, 2 parents, 3 individuals, and the principal. The committee acknowledges receipt of the petition. The chair would notify the organizations. The community then has 30 days in order to provide public comment. The committee should carefully review all of the information, either reject or concur with the proposal. And if that happens, if the committee rejects the proposal, the principal would notify the petitioner that the name has been rejected. If the committee concurs with the name, the principal would contact the superintendent. Then the superintendent carefully reviews all the information. If the superintendent rejects the proposal, the superintendent notifies the principal that the name has been rejected and no further action would be taken. If the superintendent concurs with that name proposal, the superintendent would notify the appropriate school committee subcommittee of the concurrence, and the subcommittee will determine if the proposed naming should be brought to a vote during a full school committee meeting. So that's pretty much it. And I think the conundrum here is that there's a process for naming a new building. There's a process for naming a portion of a building, but there is not a process for renaming a building.
Thank you, Adam, for reviewing this. I want to open it up for questions. Do folks have questions or follow up for Adam based off reviewing this policy?
Sure, I do.
I have one thing after this bar policy on the school side, and once that happens, it would have to be submitted to city council to be voted on as well.
Oh, sorry, Ami, it broke up on my end. Can you repeat that? Forgive me.
This is a policy on our side with the school side, the school department. But once school committee, let's say school committee votes to say, yes, we approve the name, we want a name change like we did with the Siegel School, then it goes over to the city council and they have to vote on it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Thank you.
so Kelly, I heard that you had a question you wanted to follow up.
Thank you, Marisol. So I'd like to just provide a framing for why I added this item to the agenda and adding the next item on the agenda, which is the discussion of either renaming or removing the name of John Silver. And so I just had, my framing of this, these 2 agenda items is that given that we are working so hard on racial equity and diversity, equity and inclusion in our district, there is a lot of history behind the name of John Silver. And while I hear positive, oh yes, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I tried my best not to. I was holding off. I certainly want us to get to that discussion, but I just want to make sure before, and please, forgive me because I know it's important. If anybody had any follow-up questions, just based off the policy that was reviewed prior to moving on to the discussion. Just want to make sure that we give folks a moment if they have any questions or follow-up for Adam before we move on to that next item.
Yes, I do have a question actually about the policy. Sorry, I'm taking a lot of airtime, but Adam, quick question. Is there any language on the removal of a name?
Not
I don't think so, right?
No. And just to give you the background for this policy, I was working from, I think 3 or 4 different policies that I collected, and I tried to pull, I sort of Frankenstein them together, to be honest, and tried to pull language that covered sort of the greatest common factor of the 4. So I included the components that was covered in all four. So the individual ones were all lacking one or two things, but between the four of them, none of them covered renaming and none of them covered removal.
Great, thank you.
I actually have one question around the policy, and it actually goes to Dr. Aveda's point.
Roberto, can we come to you in 2 seconds? Jeannie's tried to come in twice, so like we'll go to Jeannie and then we'll go to you, Roberto. Is that okay? Sorry, she's been waiting.
Marisol. No, I just want to know, because this is policy we're just reviewing. We haven't voted this in yet, right? I just want to make sure, because I know this came up last year and we were just trying to put something together.
I thought this was voted in and approved last year.
Yeah, this policy was voted and approved.
February.
Okay.
Yeah.
February. Yeah, and then we got pandemic in March, so
So, yeah.
right over my head.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a blur, Jeanette.
Okay, that was my question. Okay. That's it.
Roberto?
Yeah, just my question was actually around Dr. Aveda's point that City Council would have to vote on. I'm curious why they have to approve this, since it's a school district decision. I don't know if yeah, just kind of curious if you know. If you don't know, that's fine.
Schools.
Yeah, I can look
Yeah.
into it for you. And Rosemary, you might have some context. I was told when this was brought up that City Council does approve naming of buildings and facilities in the city.
I don't know if you know this, but the city of Chelsea owns the buildings.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with Rosemary. At the end, the city does own the school building, so they have to approve it.
They approve it.
And they did approve the Siegel recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Adam, I personally, pardon. I'm sorry, Roberto, you're gonna continue, go ahead.
Just wanted to say thank you. That's it. I just wanted to clarity around it. I'm not charging anybody with anything. Just kind of curious why that was. So thank you for clarifying that, Rosemary and Jeannie.
You're welcome.
And I'm particularly struck that, I do remember when Cheryl assisted us with this policy, and when we approved it, and I think I recall Cheryl pointing to, the fact that we want to, have multicultural names, and some observations that I think Adam, you sort of went over that's in the policy. And that felt really important and really powerful to acknowledge as a group. And I think, as a district, what I'm just like sort of sticking with right now that sort of jumps out at me is the same thing, Adam, that like we actually don't have a removal of a name policy or a renaming policy. And so, that's important. And I think, and also just going back to what you said, that usually within this policy, respectfully, that like, this is why we go for naming people who are, are distinguished people that have deceased, for obviously wanting to, I'm assuming it's a huge honor to have a building named after you, but also to minimize any controversial things that might come up. And so noting that that's even within our policy, but then to think that, there is that occasion where, I've heard of other districts. I haven't been around as long as other folks, but I certainly can't recall the last time we went through something as a district where we had to remove a name. We have some historians here, but I have followed other stories from other districts in which they had to do it. And so I think that jumps out at me. Is it something that we would need to do? Is it something that, we would need to have in the event that this would happen? I'm sure none of us ever want to think about a situation where we have to remove a name, but it looks like those times can happen. So I'm just curious in terms of guidance, if, whether, Adam, Almi, or Sarah, anybody has some feedback about other districts that have these policies, or is this something that we should look into to have in our toolbox here?
So Marisol, what we can do is we can look into it with legal counsel, go back to Cheryl and talk to her, and see. Obviously those were not in the original policy. This was a first stab at a policy because we didn't have one in place. And so we can definitely go back and revisit if that were the case. But, and even so, if it's not, we can still do it because we should probably, obviously it's a noticeable gap right now. So we can definitely make some amendments, and that would have to come through this subcommittee.
Yeah,
Marisol?
thank you. Yes, Rosemary, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would like to speak. First of all, I don't think this is the right time for us to be renaming the school. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have to work on and put our minds into educating the kids and getting them back into the classroom, getting the teachers back in a healthy environment for the teachers and for the students. And at this time, I don't think this is the right time to say we want to rename a school after a gentleman was here for 25 years. And without that gentleman, we would not have the Early Learning Center and having the 3- and 4-year-olds going to school in the city of Chelsea, because back then the city of Chelsea didn't have the funds. This gentleman did nothing but educate children in the city of Chelsea for 25 years. So I don't think this is the time we should be working on renaming a school. If you want to go along with renaming it the gym after someone, or the a classroom, or the library or something, I would totally go along with it. But to rename a school at this time is not the proper time. Let's work on what we're here to do. Get the kids and teachers back into a healthy environment in the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Do folks have any other follow-up questions for Adam in terms of the review on the policy before I want to give some time for Kelly to go back to where she started, which she's patiently waiting as well, that we could actually talk about the item number 3, which is exploration discussion of renaming the John Silver ELC. If there's not any more questions or feedback for Adam about the actual policy.
I just want to make a comment, if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
I just want to, if Almy, if you could get legal counsel on this, I would greatly appreciate it. So just what we know, what's within our power to change the policy. Like I said, we didn't have anything in place, and Adam worked hard to get something together, but obviously that we weren't thinking about that. So I think if we're going to redo the policy, that we have everything covered, you know, just for future. So that was it.
I have a quick add-on.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if this is something that perhaps like some school committee members could talk to legal counsel about, to not, you know, as Rosemary noted, you know, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and that's what our central office staff are, you know, really focused on right now. So I'm trying to figure out if there's any way to kind of have this conversation without adding to the central office staff. And that could be by us forming a special subcommittee to talk about this. Or having it done here, right? You know, whatever that might be, but essentially having school committee members have this conversation with legal counsel and I don't know if that's possible or what we would want to do, but I'm just throwing the idea out there. So
I actually appreciate that, Roberto, because you know, this is what Cheryl did in the past, you know, where Cheryl came and spoke to us on occasion here, and specifically about this particular policy. So I know, Almy, I appreciate you, you know, saying that, you know, you reached out to legal counsel. I absolutely think that's the way to go anyway. But I also agree with Roberto that not to overtask. And it might be good for, you know, an opportunity for us to have a little bit of a conversation with Cheryl as well, and you know, get more understanding. But that could be another option, is to, you know, have Cheryl attend the policy and procedure subcommittee meeting on this, to follow up with this item. But that's all. Yeah, thank you, Roberto.
We move on to 3.
Kelly, do you want to talk and introduce a little bit about the exploration discussion of John Silver, renaming the John Silver Early Learning Center? Take us off.
Sure, thank you. So as I began to share, the framing of this agenda item is that we have worked so hard to really bring in a racial justice lens and really work hard to undo some of these infrastructures that further marginalize our students of color. And while Rosemary, I totally agree with you that John Silver has done great things in our city, he has also done really crappy things. And I want to be mindful of that, and I want to bring that to the conversation and to the table so that we can start the conversation. I do not expect this to happen like tomorrow, right? I'm no rush to do this, but I thought it would be a really really important conversation to have during this time, right? Like Monday, we're celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. It's our first time, right? And that was a huge honor to many of our students and teachers. Teachers are so excited to celebrate this new holiday in our district. And so again, I don't envision this happening so soon because again, I totally agree with you that I want to be mindful of our principles. I want to be mindful of the times that we are in, but I also don't want to push things aside and continue to allow a man's name to be on the building when I feel a little uncomfortable with the name. And I'm not alone in this uncomfortability. And there is plenty of evidence that shares that John Silver was against bilingual education, which if you think about it now, we love bilingual education. And that's something that we advocate for. We actually are aiming to have bilingual education throughout the entire district, right? Look at our Caminos program. And John Silver was against that. John Silver, and I quote, also stated, you know, Massachusetts is a welfare magnet, really talking about immigrants and talking about our Latino community and Cambodian community. And so those are just two examples that I'd like to mention as to why I want to bring this discussion to the table. As I said, I only want to bring it to the table as a discussion and to talk about and really to hear from other committee members where they feel about this. And perhaps during the next policy and procedures, I can bring evidence that has been shared with me from former school committee members, the former first Latina school committee chairwoman, Marta Rosa, and former committee members or community members that have lived through John Silver's leadership in this city that can attest to his ways of leading the city. And so that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to bring to today's discussion. I'm here for the conversation, and I look forward to collaborating with this team to talk further about what we can do to honor, again, to honor the bilingual education, to honor diversity, equity, and inclusion in our district, and to continue working towards our racial equity goals in the district. And I personally do not think that continuing to have that name on our building aligns with our vision as a district. Thank you.
I'm proud to say that I was on the school committee after it was voted in. And John Silver brought in so many great things and more programs than you can believe in. When he made a statement, sometimes he opened his mouth and put his big foot in it. But let me tell you, what ended up was the Hispanic and everybody in this community benefited from what John Silver did for these children. And they brought in more programs. He brought in so many things. I could give you a list of things that John Silver, because he said some things that weren't right. I can agree with you. He wasn't right, but what he did in the end benefited all the children in the city of Chelsea, especially the Hispanic children. And I would never have voted the several times that I had a chance to keep renewing Boston University's, to keep going on what they were doing for us. They brought in a music program, they brought in the dental program, they brought a lot of things in. because of him being made one or two statements that were wrong, and I told him that, and when I met with him, I says, John, that's not right, it wasn't the right thing to say. And he says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it. And he agreed with me, he was wrong. But in the end, the children and the Hispanic children in the community benefited from all the things Boston University did. So my point of view is, name something else. Don't rename a school after a gentleman like John Silva, what he did for the students and the community in the city of Chelsea. Remember, he gave out 4 scholarships to the city of Chelsea for the seniors in the high school for many years. And I think a lot of the things that he did, that was benefiting the children. I'm sorry to say that I'm not going to vote for renaming a school. If you want to name something else after someone, I will go along with it if that person deserves to be named. But to change the John Early Learning Center, like I said, I'm not going to repeat myself. We would not have that early learning center for the kids, the 3 and 4-year-olds to go to, if it wasn't for John Silva bringing in the money and the finances that Boston University did. So at this time, I will not vote for renaming the school, but I will go along with anything else you want to name after a person who did something else like John Silva did. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. If I can just quickly respond to this. I absolutely respect your opinion, but I disagree with the facts that you have outlined. John Silver did not allow for translation during parent-teacher conferences. He did not allow parents in the building, and he did not support bilingual education. So I'm not sure how he supports the Latino, Latinx students. But again, I'm more than happy to bring evidence. I'm more than happy to bring the resource and books that were written on his leadership. What he actually did was place Latino and Spanish-speaking students in a classroom and kept English-speaking students in a separate classroom. And the English students received a better, higher quality education. That is not a bilingual, that's what he perceived as bilingual education. And quite frankly, it was unsuccessful. So I'm not sure how it benefited our Latino students. Now, from your perspective, sure, it helped American students and English-speaking students, but there was a huge voice that was left out, and that's the Latinx voice.
And
So
I
again,
appreciate,
yeah.
Yeah, I want to say that, this is why I think this, number one, Kelly, that I really appreciated you bringing this forward. We should be able to have conversations together that, in the midst of this time, that these are very important and close to our heart, especially with the racial justice movements that are happening across the country, and conversations that we have had, and the commitment from the city to tackle racism as a public health crisis that I keep echoing and echoing. So I really acknowledge and appreciate that you're bringing this forward. And I think looking at it from the policy perspective as to what's within our control, what are the things that we can do, and what is the process to open up a conversation, whether it's here and, just listening to Adam about the community and all the stakeholders that are involved with that conversation, I feel like is the focus of this conversation and how we feel about it, right? And just listening to perspectives of people, just like Rosemary and anybody else that's, has feedback to speak, we want to make sure that we make space for that. But, even just the agenda itself, the item, this is about us exploring this issue. And I just really want to tell you that, I appreciate you bringing it forward, and I think it's an important one. And we often hear stories and we don't know what are stories. Is it one person, or is this a lot of stories, and a lot of people? And so I think as a school committee, it is our job to listen. And so I appreciate you bringing it forward, and especially during this time. And Rosemary, thank you for sharing too your perspective. I just want to give some time for other folks if they have any comments, and also if there's any questions about this proposal. Does anybody else? Henry, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I came to the city of Chelsea when the ending of the receivership was ending. Guy Senegate was the city manager at the time, and I got to know Mr. Silver after all the school issues and the school input that he was doing with the Chelsea Public Schools. I was on his campaign when he ran for governor. The things that I'm hearing both from from Kelly and from Rosemary, I appreciate both sides of the conversation. But conversation that I heard from Kelly, I can honestly say from the bottom of my heart, I'd never heard anything or saw anything because my tongue has no fur on it. You know what I'm saying? So if I heard something that I didn't like or saw something I didn't agree with, I would definitely speak out on it. I appreciate both Rosemary and you, Kelly, for bringing this up to the group. I sat back, I did some research on my own as well. I spoke to other people in the community as well to see how they feel about the change, how they feel about the late John Silver, Dr. Silver, and some students who started at the Early Learning Center, went to college and came back to the city. I've been talking to some of them as well. And you're gonna have mixed conversations. You're gonna have mixed views on both sides, good and bad. My concern is, as Rosemary said a couple of times and others have said, our main focus right now, and there's no disrespect on anyone's part at all, but our main focus right now is to educate our kids. I have nieces and nephews that are in this age group, and my nieces and nephews, on a weekly basis, we talk about the type of education they're getting on Zoom, and they're not happy with it. Their parents are not happy with it. They're not receiving the proper education. I have neighbors next door. Her daughter is going to K1 right now, and the same thing. So I think we really need to not to forget, never forget, but work on a way that we can figure out how to bring this back, discuss things on both sides that we all understand on both opinions, but to focus more on the education of our students. We need to get these kids back in school. We need to get the teachers back in school. If we as a group of 9, cannot go to one monthly school committee meeting at City Hall, how in the world are we going to expect our teachers to go 2 days a week in the schools? So we need to figure out a way to get the teachers and the students back in school first. And then we can have this big old discussion that's very deep and very passionate on both sides. I heard the emotions on Kelly's side as well as Rosemary's side. It's a very deep, raw conversation that we all need to be having. Unfortunately, it's not the right time right now. It's a great thought. It's a great communication start, beginning conversation start. But I really think we need to focus heavily on getting these schools right back into session, get the kids in there, get the teachers in there, and let's move forward. Because I truly believe, talking to my nieces and nephews and their parents, that they're afraid that their kids are not getting proper education. And they're lacking the education they deserve on Zoom and everything else. And for me, my heart is telling us, get these kids back together in school. Get these teachers back in school. Whatever we have to do, let's work on this first. And once this is resolved, we can come back and say, okay, let's talk about rename the school or whatever else we need to talk about that is passionate to all of us. But I really think we need to get the kids back in school with the teachers because our kids are failing. And we as leaders on the school committee, we are truly, I believe, failing our students by not trying to find out ways to get them back in class. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Kelly on her proposal or comments about renaming the John Silver Early Learning Center?
I have a comment. So, like Kelly said, she's not asking to do this right away, right? So I think our first focus is getting legal counsel, and if we could change our draft of what we have on renaming schools. So I think that's the first thing that we have to do. Are we going out tomorrow, going crazy? Let me call the council and see what's going on. No, that's not going to happen because we know what priorities are. This is just something that's being brought up. And we're not forgetting that we're in a pandemic and that stuff is going on and that the kids need support. So, you know, of course, we have our priorities. So I firmly believe that our first thing is what can we do with the policy we have, and can we amend it, and can we add that? I think that's the first step. I wasn't around for the John Silver days, but I've had constituents reach out to me with strong words about Mr. Silver. So, you know, like I said, not tomorrow I'm gonna go crazy and start calling people, but this is something that I would like to hear more about. And that's all I'm gonna say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Does anybody else have questions or comments about this?
I have a comment. Just before I say what I'm going to say, I just want to I do want to say that I support the idea of doing this. Right. For me, it's really a question of, one, the timing. Right. Like has been said many times. Like, is this the right time to do this given the priorities? And I believe that we have reached a point where we all agree that this shouldn't, like, even if we move forward with this shouldn't happen right this instant. And I think that is fair. I do want to say, in a city where our student body is 87+% Latinx, the fact that all of our schools are named after white men is a problem, right? And if we never build another school and we take these names as permanent, then it means that for eternity, all of the schools will be named after white men. That is not okay. And so I think that we need to have this conversation around, you know, how are we as a community going to move forward in ensuring that our buildings are representative of the community that we serve. To Rosemary's point around, you know, John Silver did a great many things for our community. People are not all good or all bad. Right? We can have individuals who have done good things for our community, but have also hurt our community. And that is something that we have to hold, because it is just humanity. Like, we're not perfect, right? And we're also not 100% evil, you know, if somebody is a bad person. So I think we need to hold those things, and also understand that having a building named after you is not something that anybody deserves automatically. It's a privilege that you have, and we should be selecting among the best of us. And I think that there are many people in our community who would argue that John Silver is not among the best of us. And so I think we need to have this conversation as a community to make sure that we can move forward and actually decide whether his name should be on this building or not. That is it. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment. Roberto, the reason they're all white men is because we named the schools after veterans who died in different wars. So that's the reason they're all white men, and they died. We didn't look at the color of the skin or anything. If there was a black gentleman or a Hispanic gentleman, we would have named them after. But these are the people who lived in the city of Chelsea, most of them are down at the Burke School, and they died for keeping us free. So that's why we named them after veterans. And because they're white, I'm sorry to say, you know, that's the way it is, but they're white. But if there was a Hispanic or a black gentleman, they would have named the school after them. But these are the names they picked of war veterans. That's why it's all white men. So I'm sorry.
I would say that there's a Puerto Rican veteran monument in South End that, you know, luckily for the leadership that pushed for that, for certain, there's more diversity in our veteran service. But I would say, for the sake of today's conversation, I just want to add that my opinion as far as this goes is, I really respect the fact that Kelly brought this forward. I think that if we're moving forward as a city with different priorities that are science informed, prioritizing the safety of our students and teachers, and delivering, you know, learning curriculum, which, you know, we're doing. You know, the whole evaluation of that subject that Henry brought forward, I think, you know, definitely was important to hear from you, Henry, but I know that's like a conversation for a different space. But, you know, in terms of prioritizing our time, I think that I really honor the fact that this is the space in which we're supposed to have those conversations as a body. We have policies and procedures for a reason. And for me, I'm just more interested in that we have a process that if any member comes forward one day with a similar question or a request, that they will be honored with the same treatment, right? And that's why policies exist. It's to have a body, an agreement about a way they're gonna move forward on something, that this isn't like, well, we're in the mood to do it or we're not in the mood. So I agree with Jeannie that, like, the first step is really looking at what is the renaming or removal of a name policy? And I think actually to strengthen that, to Roberto's point, that if it is forever, and given the diversity and change of our city and even the history of it, that this feels like it's even more important to have in the school committee's toolbox. And the second thing I'll say is that in terms of history and in terms of our policies and procedures or laws, as a criminal justice student that didn't go to law school, you know, they are to be amended. The rules, policies, and procedures are created. They are often a reflection of a definition of a society and the values that they want to embody. So, you know, while we can honor who John Silver was at a particular point in history and his contributions, what we're saying at this moment is like, maybe things change and we need to revisit things. And what does that look like? And what does it look like when we have a historic, you know, Black Lives Matter movement happening in our country? You know, why not now? Why not look at these things now together as a body? And who are the stakeholders in the community that should be part of that conversation? As school committee members, we're here to be a voice, to advocate, to bring things forward. And I think that, Kelly, you're doing your role by bringing this forward from what the feedback you've heard, you know? But I think timing, timing is always going to be tricky for these things. So, you know, I do appreciate the fact that you brought this forward. I think it is something worthy for us to continue to discuss. And I think that, you know, this process, just like any other process, we should have something to refer to. And, you know, I appreciate, Almi, you bringing in, you know, whether having Cheryl to come in as a legal counsel to discuss this further with her and with Adam, or, you know, if whatever next steps we could take for that. But ultimately, it's hard. You know, like, we're here, we're in the middle of an unprecedented, historic global pandemic, you know, like, so this is part of our leadership as well, is to bring up these issues and look at them carefully, and, you know, hopefully have a transparent process that the community in the city, the district, can feel proud of. That's our job, you know? So I'm not going to sit here and say that I believe everything that I hear from this side or that side. At the end, it's about having a process that stakeholders can have a voice in. So that's where I kind of land on it. And I do think it's relevant to our times. And I think it also shows that, you know, Almi's out there fighting the good fights. And, you know, like I mentioned a few months back, she was part of a citywide meeting where the city manager and other stakeholders talked about addressing racism as a public health crisis in the city of Chelsea. And to Almi's credit, you know, I don't want Almi going into meetings all by herself all the time. And she's doing so much just alone with this pandemic, and coming up with all these different ways to show that, you know, we mean business, that we're going to support wherever it makes sense. So I think hearing from all of you and us being able to have these conversations is important. And I think it's a process. So Kelly, I just wanted to like really acknowledge you, you know, and also bravely to name the things that you named, because typically in marginalized communities, voices don't feel empowered to speak out. And so given that we're still celebrating, you know, our Hispanic Heritage Month, like, it's important even more that, you know, when we have leaders who are people of color, that we hear them. And so I just really want to commend you for bringing it forward. And, you know, Almi, I don't know if you want to give us some feedback. If anybody else doesn't have questions or comments, I'm so sorry. I want to just give Almi some time for some feedback or suggestions for next steps based off this conversation. If anybody else has any other questions or feedback.
I just have a quick comment before Dr. Aveda jumps in. I would like, especially from Dr. Aveda, like, if you can just, if there's any steps that you think we as a body can take without you, right? Like, so that we can kind of move things along without adding to your workload. Like, it would be great to hear that so that we can, you know, start to have those conversations.
Yeah, I will echo, and I do want to say I really appreciate this conversation, because it's important conversation to have, and this is the subcommittees where we can really have these conversations, which is nice. I believe in listening and hearing, or a good next step would be to have somebody reach out to our city solicitor and looking at the policy and maybe amending some language or adding some language, right? And so if this committee decides that someone on here or two people or a group wants to look into that, we are open. If you want one of us to do it, I can ask staff to look into it as well. So I leave that with you as a next step. And then what we could do at our next policy meeting is invite Cheryl to talk to us as well. After I could ask her to do some research. So just, those are some next steps. I maybe could work with Cheryl, let her know what we discussed and see if she can find some language and then come to our next policy meeting. And that's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Almi. Does anybody else have any other suggestions for follow-ups or next steps?
So sorry, so Almi, you said you think you should set up that meeting, or do you or is that something that you think
I can reach out to Cheryl. Cheryl really helped us and with this draft, so I can reach out to her and see if we can and let her know what we talked about and go from there. And then have her look at some language and then bring that to the committee.
I just wonder if, Kelly and, maybe a couple more of the school committee members could do that. Would that be a problem if we went ahead and did that instead?
You're more than welcome to have a conversation with Cheryl. Any of you, if any of you want to do like an ad hoc committee of this policy committee.
Yeah, just to kind of keep things kind of on our end and not have to add to your plate.
Totally up to you guys.
I'm advocating for that, just so we can kind of drive this until the situation with the pandemic or the COVID pandemic dies down, right? And we're able to be at a more stable place where we can have a little bit more of the time of central office to focus on this issue that is definitely less urgent. So I wonder if maybe I don't know, a subcommittee of like 4 of us, Kelly and 3 others might be, we could reach out to Cheryl. I don't know what the rest of the subcommittee wants.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm thinking perhaps Marisol and Marisol as the chair of this subcommittee, perhaps we can collaborate, and anyone else who would like to join, we can perhaps set up a call with Cheryl or just invite her to our next subcommittee meeting and see if she has the capacity to join us.
I'd love to participate in that.
Roberto, can I just say, regardless of how that spells out, I appreciate the sentiment. I kind of know where it's coming from, and it means something.
With his baby on his shoulder. Like baby magic.
I can only imagine what it feels like for you to have 6,000 plus children. I only have 1 and I'm losing my mind.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think, Almi, perhaps we can schedule a call. I do want to heed a little bit that I know perhaps maybe the first step is to have a call with you to make sure that that conversation feels good to you based off, your leadership. And then that way Kelly and I can plan forward. But I think pretty much what you suggested feels good. To have her come or to see what are the next steps that we could take to continue to explore this based off her legal counsel, in terms of policy wise. And also I would just strongly recommend that that conversation be brought back to the subcommittee. I think that if there's other agenda items that become pressing, for sure, I'm not saying this should be the sole place for that, but it does fall under the policy, and in honor of not trying to violating any open meeting laws, I just want to make sure that we bring that back here, because this is an important space in which we can further discuss the next steps that are coming out of this tonight, for continuity and for transparency. And then the last thing I would say, I just want to flag that following up with policy and following up with what are our opportunities or what are options is not saying that we're pushing something forward in a time frame that goes either way. I think that it's clear that we need to have this, and it might be an opportunity to develop additional policy that protects us when it comes to these situations. So I see this as a gain no matter what. And that also that I think center to this process is that I don't know that we're at liberty of, you know, when we bring in stakeholders or when we need to speak with stakeholders involved with this process, it's clear that this goes all the way to city council if we were to ever to pursue something like this. So what I'm trying to say is that, you know, I don't want people to be dissuaded from doing what's in their right to explore, right? That like this is a policy and procedure discussion. So I don't want anyone to feel bad about exploring these things or bringing them forward. This is what we're here for. So I get that we're in the middle of a pandemic and education is important and all of that. But it seems like if there's folks that could take the lead and for us to do a little homework and to continue to bring back information to the subcommittee around this feels necessary and feels important, you know? So what remains to unfold, I think we just have to, you know, stick to our integrity of the process, and we're doing our job and we'll see what develops, you know? But there's no saying or telling what that timeline could look like. So we just got to honor that. That would be my only thing. So, but it's 7 o'clock. You know, Kelly, I don't know if you have anything to add or anybody else. Dr. Albeida, Elmi, Adam.
Sorry, I just have to run. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for having this conversation, and have a good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you, Roberto.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo Roberto and everyone who has shared. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation, and I look forward to collaborating with you all.
Thank you, Kelly. Anybody else with any comments or questions or anything else before we move to a close? I don't know, we're at 7. Okay. So just thank you again. Thank you, Adam, for reviewing that with us. And, you know, I will say my heart, you know, agrees that this is we're in a very unprecedented time. But I think this is important for us to also, you know, we learn as we go, and sometimes policies are created because of these situations. So it just shows a need for us, you know, and something that we can continue to work on as we continue to have this conversation. So just thank you all for all of that. And I will send my notes to Mariana, Almi, or did I send them to I feel like
Send them to Mariana.
Right?
Mariana,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And thank you all for your participation. So would I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn. What is it? 7:02.
May I have a second?
Rosemary, Curly, Henry, you guys all want to stay in this meeting?
Want to stay?
I thought I couldn't vote because of my part of the
I
committee.
don't
but
think I
second it.
can
Hello,
second.
I
Yeah.
was trying to say something too. I said I'll second it.
Oh, but you were muted.
What?
We could hear
So
you
I
now,
couldn't-
but you were muted.
Oh,
I couldn't say anything just because.
second the motion, please.
Thank you, Miss Carlisle.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks,
Good
everyone. Stay
night.
safe.
Good night. Meeting adjourned.
Bye.
Thank you.